From the authentic soul of Bernie Siegel, MD, comes Mind Health Matters, a show that reflects Bernie's passion to reach people struggling with all of life's challenges, not just the physical ones, so that each person can live life fully with the understanding that, as Bernie reminds us, we only have today. Believing that we are all here to love one another, each in our own unique way, Bernie has crafted eternal truths and the timeless wisdom of the ages. Join Bernie as he shares his powerful journey through life while offering us special nuggets of his sacred wisdom.
Everybody. I'm feeling
welcome. Welcome to Mind Health Matters with Dr. Bernie Siegel, who you can hear his show Wednesday through Friday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time on the Dreamvisions 7 radio network. We're a syndicated Boston-based internet radio station, media partner for the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. And Bernie has an excellent guest. She is Dr. Lissa Rankin, New York Times best-selling author of The Daily Flame, Mind Over Medicine, The Fear Cure, and The Anatomy of a Calling. She is the speaker, founder of the Whole Health Medicine Institute, creator of The Daily Flame, and mystic. And that is, she is a physician, a medical doctor. So, and Bernie's had Dr. Lissa on before. Bernie and Dr. Lissa will be talking about the latest book, The Daily Flame, 365 Love Letters from Your Inner Pilot Light by Sounds Truth. So, Bernie, here's Bernie.
Well, you know what popped into my head, and then we'll talk about the books. Lissa, how did you get to be an abnormal doctor?
Well, that was what my whole book, The Anatomy of a Calling, was about, is that crazy mystical journey from kind of trauma to, really having a completely different orientation towards life and medicine. But in short, like so many doctors, I was a conventional OBGYN, trained at Duke and Northwestern and places like that. And I didn't have language for it at the time, but I now realize that I was suffering from what some of the Harvard doctors are calling moral injury. They're saying, doctors aren't burned out. We are morally injured the way return war veterans are morally injured from having followed orders and done what they were expected to do, but knowing that what they were doing was hurting people, that they were hurting innocent civilians, for example, in the process of following orders. And I, too, was kind of following orders. And, when I started my medical practice, I was expected to see 25 patients a day. And by the time I left 8 years later, I was expected to see 40 patients a day, which meant that I had about 7.5 minutes with my patients. And as you know, Bernie, if you're a healer, you can't do healing work in 7.5 minutes. I mean, you can barely refill somebody's prescription and do their pap smear in 7.5 minutes, much less actually attend to the mind, body, soul, spirit connection that is necessary for healing work. So it was extremely painful for me to know, to sense what patients needed and to feel helpless to actually meet that need. And so increasingly I was, going home every day feeling that burden of that moral injury, and it led to a kind of suicidal depression by the time I was 24 weeks pregnant with my daughter. And that led to a crisis, sort of the breakdown to breakthrough that led to me quitting my job in 2007. And this was, all kinds of things were falling apart at the same time. My beloved father, who was also a physician, died at 59. 2 weeks after my daughter was born, my brother, who was a healthy 33-year-old, wound up in full-blown liver failure as a side effect from the antibiotic Zithromax that he was taking for a sinus infection. And my dog died, and my daughter's father, who was going to be the primary caregiver for my baby because I had to go back to work at 4 weeks, cut 2 fingers off his hand with a table saw. It was like all hell broke loose all at once. And I didn't know what I would do when I quit. I couldn't afford to quit. My husband wasn't working. I was responsible for all of the financial obligations of the family, and I still had medical school debt. But I wound up becoming $200,000 in debt and taking 2 years to recover from my depression and my moral injury and my grief over losing my dad. And I wound up I ended up taking a job in Mill Valley, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area at an integrative medicine practice where they kind of seduced me with the promise that I could have an hour with my patients. And that sounded amazing. I thought, well, if I have an hour, I can do healing work. But these were some of the most unusual patients I had ever dealt with in my entire life. Anybody who knows Marin County knows that it's kind of a joke. Like, what health nuts people in Marin County are. I mean, I'm not kidding.
No, I know.
And I had worked with people in the inner city of Chicago. I had worked with Somali refugees on the Mexican border. I had worked with suburban San Diegans, but I was not prepared to face what I faced in Marin County, which was by the time people showed up at my office, they had seen the best conventional doctors at UCSF and Stanford, excellent medical care. They were eating their raw vegan diet and working out with their personal trainer and taking 100 supplements, and they had seen their acupuncturist and their naturopath, and they were going to yoga and meditating every morning, and they were the sickest people I've ever seen in my life. And I honestly didn't know what to make of this. I felt extremely helpless because, every now and then I could find something that someone had maybe missed in a workup and kind of pull out a little functional medicine trick, and catch something subclinical that I could treat, and they'd suddenly have an amazing response.
Right.
But for the most part, I would look at their records and I'd think, gosh, this person has had the best medical care ever, and they're doing everything right. Why are they so sick?
Well, it's the same reason. Let me interrupt. You wrote your book.
Yeah.
Why they're not doing well is because they're not being treated. Jung said it, I keep repeating this, many, many years ago. The diagnosis may help the doctor, but it doesn't help the patient. The key thing is the story. For it alone shows human background and human suffering, and only at that point can the doctor's therapy begin to operate. And that's the struggle you're having. Everybody was treating their diagnosis, and then you come along and hopefully begin to treat their story. And really, I think, in a sense, why you wrote your book, it's to help people deal with their story, their life.
Well, what ended up happening is that I did listen to their stories. I didn't really have much else to offer. And so I just kind of started asking penetrating questions, things like, what does your body need in order to heal? Or what is your body saying no to? Or what would it take for you to live a life that your body would love? And people would invariably break into tears because they knew. They knew right away the answers to those questions, and I would mostly just sit and listen. And people started having quite remarkable recoveries and, what physicians might call spontaneous remissions.
I got to keep interrupting to make the point because I learned from Helen Keller, too. Just part of her quote. I've heard of the stars, the rainbows, the play of light on the waves. These I would like to see, but far more than sight I wish for my ears to be open. The voice of a friend, the imaginations of Mozart. Deafness is darker by far than blindness. You began to listen to people. Then they hear themselves. I had one patient talk to me for 2 hours, and I never said a word. And at the end of it, I busted out laughing because she said, that's the greatest conversation I've ever had with anyone. She was talking to herself, and I got credit for what came forth. Yeah. And again, we're not trained to do that. I have to tell you one, it'll make you smile. But this woman came into my office, and I could tell she was punishing herself. Every few months, she was having some kind of operation. And I realized she would keep complaining until the doctors would say, all right, I'll do it, because they didn't have any real evidence that something was wrong. And she came into my office. I looked at her record. I said, look, you're punishing yourself. I'm not going to operate on you. But if you want to come in and talk to me, maybe we can straighten your life out. A few months later, I get a letter from her insurance company. We do not pay surgeons for talking. So
that's
I wrote
the whole
them,
problem.
and I said, take a look at her chart and her record and how much money she's cost you, and you'll see that I'm saving you a lot of money by talking, because she was punishing herself. And then a letter came back, and I got a kick out of their sense of humor. Okay, keep talking.
Yeah, well, I think, sometimes when there's just a loving presence that can hold space for somebody's story, we start to hear the voice of what I call your inner pilot light, which is what this book, The Daily Flame, is based on. And for me, that, you asked, how did I end up here? And part of it was that when I was in the middle of my kind of suicidal ideas when I was 24 weeks pregnant, I found myself on the floor of the bathroom, as so many people in crisis seem to do, and I heard this voice that said, "Sweetheart, you're going to have to quit your job." And I had never heard a voice before, and I didn't know what to make of it, and it scared me. And at the same time, I felt this profound sense of relief, because as soon as the voice said, "Sweetheart, you're going to have to quit your job," my first feeling was relief, because I was like, oh, my God, that's true. And then, of course, my second feeling was panic, because I can't do that. But the feeling of the truth felt like just I could take a breath.
Yeah.
And in that breath, the second thing that voice said is, you don't have to do anything right now. You just have to make peace with what's true. And it took me another 2 years to actually leave my job, to actually act on that guidance.
Right. But you're on the path,
Yeah, but that voice, and it's not always a voice. Sometimes it's a vision, sometimes it's a dream, sometimes it's a synchronicity. But that guidance started coming more regularly, and I kind of joke that back then I had some sort of blind trust, and now I have evidence-based trust. Because what I've found is that if I actually can manage my own fear and have the courage to act on that guidance, that unexplainable, beautiful, mysterious things happen, and I wind up talking to Bernie Siegel on a radio show 10 years later.
You said mysterious, but at least you accepted it, that it happened.
I did.
That's the key.
I realize that's part of what makes me a bit different sometimes.
Right. I've been hearing voices for God knows how long. And see, it's interesting. I said, for God knows. Yeah, because my wife used to say, honey, it comes from God knows where. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful way of saying it. But just a brief example was the day my father was dying, the voice said, how did your parents meet? I said, I don't know. Ask your mother when you get to the hospital. So I did. And to make a long story short, my father took my mother out because he lost the coin toss and had to take her out. And he died laughing, looking wonderful because of that crazy thing, because my mother kept telling stories and it was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Nobody was sad or worried or frightened about death because there were little grandchildren in the room, And here's this man dying with a big grin on his face, looking wonderful.
What a beautiful story.
If we can get our minds quiet, that voice can speak to all of us. And let me add one more thing so you can diagnose me as insane, and then we'll go on. But one is, as an aside, the suicide rate in physicians is higher than the general population. And we're not trained to care for people. One doctor wrote an article called Not on My Shift. They were keeping a man from being dead. And he finally realized, but he's not alive. We're just keeping his heart beating. And so he let him die on his shift. But he woke up to the pain. And I think that's the problem. We're not trained to deal with death, to deal with the suffering. I mean, I talk to God a lot saying, why did you make a world like this? But I got answers, that a perfect world is not creation. You're here to live and learn. So, it helped me work things out. And one more thing that directed me, and probably did you again as you were with people, I went to a meeting run by Dr. Carl Simonton years ago, who wrote the book Getting Well Again. 150 people were in the audience, and I was the only doctor. It blew my mind. Here's a doctor talking about how to help cancer patients, and I'm the only physician in the room. But thank God, next to me were all my patients. And this quote, "You're a nice guy. I feel better when I'm in the office with you, but I can't take you home with me."